A year ago, exit polls showed Biden's approval rating among black voters at 87%. Now, it's 63%.
Explain what?
Biden crime bill. The Biden crime bill.
The Biden crime bill.
Hell, we've had crime bills coming out our ear. Every major crime bill since 1976 that's come out of this Congress. Every minor crime bill has had the name of the Democratic senator from the state of Delaware, Joe Biden, on that bill. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, because they literally have not been socialized. I'm the guy that wrote this bill. Presumptuous thing to say, but I wrote this bill. My own little hands.
What's your view on the crime bill that you wrote in 1994, which showed prejudice against minorities?
You ashamed of that bill?
Not at all. Matter of fact, I drafted the bill, as you remember.
I know that.
Is that it?
No, there's more.
When I heard him reach to the bottom of the deck and talk about one party putting people in chains, when I heard someone that I admired and have been on platforms with talk about ordinary conservative principles as being essentially racial viciousness, because that's the allegation he was making yesterday, I was disappointed by it, but I have to tell you, it brought back memories to me. It brought back memories of these Democratic politicians in the South who think they can go before black crowds and say one thing, that nobody else will hear it, and that they can somehow get a cheer in the room, and that they can blithely go on about their business. That's not the way you can do politics anymore because of the media, and I think I hope Vice President Biden learned an important lesson. You can't say one thing to a certain kind of people thinking nobody else is hearing you.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
All of those things that black people talked about so much during the election, President Biden said he'd have their back, and that is what they're saying. So where are you? We're 9-10 months into your administration, and now you're hearing, and we've been hearing for months, activists and people who get people out to vote saying, you have to give us something to go back to black people and say you did this for them. And that is what they're hoping to see. They haven't seen it, and there's this immense frustration that I think the White House has not really paid as much attention to as black voters want.
You called black Americans voting for the Democratic Party an arranged marriage. Now you're calling for a divorce. Tell me why.
Yeah, so it's an arranged marriage because, as I clarified in the article, Black Americans back in the day when Republicans and Democrats kind of switched their platforms didn't really have a choice if they were going to stay engaged with American politics. And at that time in the 60s, obviously it was very critical that they do. And it's very critical now that Black Americans stay engaged with the political process as well. Democrats have not delivered, even though they've had the House, both houses, as well as the White House. They haven't delivered specifically for Black Americans.
I understand and even agree with the critique of the Democratic Party's relationship to black people. It's exploitative, they take us for granted, and at the analytic level, we are a captured electorate. That is to say, they know they got us. If we vote, we voting for them. We convince black voters to do this. I mean, I'm just thinking about, again, a practical context. And you're talking to somebody who's been a member of the Green Party for 2 decades. So I'm not here caping for the Democrats. I'm just trying to make sort of think through how we can convince voters of this. Let's say in the 2020 election, right? Let's say we're in a state like Ohio, Virginia, Pennsylvania, where there was a legitimate chance that a particular member of the House or the Senate could have won, or in the governor's house, right? They could have won on the Democrat side and the Republican side. And let's say that the Republican makes a more persuasive argument. Let's say in Georgia, for example, the Republican had made a more persuasive argument than Raphael Warnock. And you say, well, look, he has black interests at heart, or she has black interests at heart more than this Democratic candidate. And black people decide to put their weight behind the Republican candidate in that case, or the third party candidate in that case. I get the logic of saying we're going to set the example, but then you lose control of the Senate, right? The Democrats control the Senate by a hair, right? We need Kamala Harris as the tiebreaker. So if that is in fact the case, are we having a small victory or a symbolic victory, maybe even a Pyrrhic victory, if we choose the Republican but lose the Senate, or choose the Republican and empower them on a national scale to do tremendous amounts of harm? Do we say, look, Joe Biden clearly doesn't have a progressive agenda for black folk, but there's Donald Trump on the one hand, there's the Green Party candidate on the other, there's the Freedom Party candidate on the other, or whomever. How in an election like 2020 could we have strategically employed what you're talking about?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think one thing we needed to start with this campaigning and this shifting in narrative about who gets neglected and who gets well served at the beginning, to move the candidates toward the middle instead of these polar opposites moving the population, the voting population toward their polls. So first of all, elections are a sort of culmination or milestone in the overall political process. So we have to start developing these narratives now, right? And to be just for the record, I'm not caping for anyone except Black America, right? Except for America in general, because what we cannot continue to do is have Black America at the bottom and continuing to need support, continuing to cry out for assistance and support when our government has failed us. I think we need to, divorcing or breaking up is not saying that you have to go with Republicans. What it does say is that your vote is up for sale to the highest bidder who is going to have an agenda for you. And moving people to the middle says that if we are about America thriving, not just Black people need to demand this, all Americans need to demand this. Black Americans have used our voice, our civil rights gains to support every social justice movement. We are owed, America needs this, and we are due.
At this point, we don't need another speech. We don't need him to come to Georgia and use us as a prop.
It sounds like you're disappointed in President Biden.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, and especially on this issue and some other issues, we're not even having a conversation about police reform anymore.
You mentioned the child tax credit. Democrats bragged about it having child poverty. Then it expired, and they weren't able to get a continuation of the child tax credit in this latest Inflation Reduction Act bill. You mentioned the federal $15 minimum wage. I applaud that effort, but the national $15 minimum wage was a core part of Biden's own agenda. It was a promise that he made to Bernie Sanders when Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race without much of a fight. And, that obviously has not come to fruition. And there are issues that disproportionately affect Black people that are also core to Biden's campaign promises, including the stimulus checks that are still front of mind for a lot of people, which never came through in their entirety, and this big promise to cancel student loan debt. Specifically, Biden said, and people have memory hold this, that he would cancel all student loan debt for graduates of historically Black colleges and universities making under $125,000 a year. He's not done that or followed through in his promise to do a blanket $10,000 at least of cancellation for everyone across the board. So staring down the barrel of those kinds of concerns and that framing that shows that Biden seems to have reneged on many of these promises, how do you see that playing out with voters in midterms?
Yes, I think that Black voters have unfinished business in 2022, that because of the progress that has been made, when you look at student loans, while he has not forgiven student loans, no one has had to pay a federal student loan since he's been president. And that is the first president that can say that. While he has not forgiven student loans, he has reduced the interest rates to 0% at a time where interest rates are rising. And so I'm not telling Black voters to take his word for it. I'm telling them to look at his actions, and his actions are progress, and it is relief if it is not for forgiveness.
Yeah, of course, the student loan moratorium, he's threatening to lift it at the end of the month, right before midterms. And it was, in fact, Donald Trump who instituted the moratorium in the first place.
He's the real deal, and the boy, look how he can still play. He got some guns on him.
The vice president said I should know better, and this is what I know. As a Black man in America, I know the deeply harmful and hurtful usage of the word boy and how it was used to dehumanize and degrade. I know that segregationists like the two people you were talking about, through their laws and their language, deeply wounded this nation, and
present-day manifestations of their work can still be seen in Black and brown communities like the one I go home to. I know that somebody running for President of the United States, somebody running to be the leader of our party, should know that using the word boy in the way he did can cause hurt and pain, and we need a presidential nominee and leader of our party to be sensitive to that.
LLJ Cool J. By the way, that man's got biceps bigger than my thighs. I think he's...
Republicans found an unlikely ally on Capitol Hill Thursday, President Biden. He says he will sign a GOP-led bill to roll back a D.C. crime bill passed by the city council if it makes it to his desk.
One thing that the president believes in is making sure that the streets in America and communities across the country are safe.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.